Lawnboys Post 1975, and welcome to my Christmas message for 2022. Time to get the cliche bit out the way right at the start. I can't believe it's been another year already. I mean, it just flies by. It really does feel like yesterday when I did my last one of these. I've done a Christmas message, as I say every year, on my channel. Every year since, well, I've done a Christmas video every year since I started my channel, but I believe actually doing Christmas messages I've now done for 10 years. They weren't always necessarily year stamped or date stamped, but I've done them every year, and they are an important part of my channel because I absolutely love and adore Christmas. If you watch my messages, I think it's safe to say you probably appreciate that fact. Also, I do enjoy sharing memories about Christmas and nostalgia about Christmas and traditions and things like that. It's just, I've never fallen out of love with Christmas. Lots of adults say, if you have kids, then Christmas becomes Christmas again. I do not, but I've never fallen out of love with Christmas. Some people say it isn't the same as an adult, and I mentioned this a few years ago. You've got to make an effort, and I truly do, because I absolutely love Christmas. John McClane is not atop my Christmas tree this year. That's because when I tried to attach him to my tree, it basically went south. He's too heavy for the tree to support him anymore. Let's just say Bruce Willis has become a little rotund in old age. So we've gone back with the fairy. All the presents are there. They're all done. They're all dusted. They're all wrapped. I bought everything I need for everyone I care about. So I'm truly in the home straight for Christmas. In fact, I've got my traditions covered. I bought a new hat. The old hat was simply not going to make it another Christmas. Funnily enough, I bought it from B&M, and being a man in men's shop like this, saw the hats, walked straight by, grabbed hat, didn't look at it, went to checkout, bought it, came home and realised it didn't have this on it. So what I did was I bought a dog scarf from a local supermarket for £1, and I transferred said fluffy ball. I think it turned out quite all right. Anyway, traditions covered. I have my Christmas Beano. I've read the Christmas Beano since I was a kid. I absolutely love the Christmas Beano. Honestly, it was my favourite thing when it would come out on Christmas Eve as a kid, because the Beano was released every Wednesday, and when it coincided with Christmas Eve, so possibly in my entire duration of reading the Beano, that was probably once. But it was truly magical when the Christmas Beano was on Christmas Eve. I will be saving this for Christmas Eve, because that's what you're supposed to do with the Christmas Beano. It's the law. Also, I have my Christmas TV guide. Now, it's funny because I've mentioned this before and what a big deal Christmas TV guides were when you were a kid, but Christmas is the only time I watch TV, because I don't have access to TV in my room. I have access to streaming. Basically, I watch Amazon, I watch YouTube. I can watch iPlayer if I want to, but I choose not to because that's the BBC, and I don't like the BBC. But this isn't about that, because this is about Christmas and positivity and love and shit. But at Christmas, I like the fact, because we're all freed up with streaming, aren't we? I've talked about this before. We're all freed up with streaming. It's what you want, when you want to watch it. You're not tied to TV anymore. But I have such nostalgia and warm, fuzzy memories of what a big deal this was back in the day, that for these couple of days a year, I like the fact I forced myself to be tied to TV. It's kind of, it's just a nice thing, and it reminds me of being a child, of seeing what big guns the TV companies have bought out for Christmas. I mean, it was more of a big deal then because they made a big effort. I guess they make slightly less of an effort now because they can't compete with streaming. But it would not be Christmas if it wasn't for the TV guide. I will go through this, and, well, I have gone through this, and I will circle, or have circled, all the things that I want to watch, and they're all going to be festive things, or festive specials of shows. Not going to be anything that's not related to Christmas, because what's the point? But what do I want to talk about this year? I want to talk about, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but I want to talk about the memories I have of going into toy stores at Christmas at a very young age with both my brothers that our mum would take us to as a special treat, as a kind of free day out, or a free half day out. It wasn't to buy Christmas presents. I'm jumping ahead of myself, but yeah, it wasn't to buy Christmas presents, but it was an event. It was something that she knew her kids would absolutely love, and I remember it so fondly and absolutely loving these the times we would do it, which would be every year from around about the ages sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe. Certainly wasn't when we were at secondary school, but yeah, I just remember it amazingly. And what inspired me to talk about this and reminded me to think about these memories is the fact that Toys R Us is coming back. Toys R Us is coming back to Britain. I believe it's actually going to be reopening actual physical stores, but Toys R Us may already be back, or is definitely coming back in North America, or at least America, I believe, inside department stores, inside Macy's department stores. So it's going to be a store within a store, and that got me thinking about the one time we did go to Toys R Us, which was literally as a kid. Because you got to remember, Toys R Us in this country kicked in 1985. Toys R Us in America was what, the 50s, the late 50s, maybe the very early 60s. So yeah, that was first time you went to Toys R Us as a kid at Christmas was literally like walking into Santa's grotto. But yeah, so thinking about that, it got reminded me, because when I was a kid, there were no sort of actual complete physical toy shops. I mean, not at least in Bristol. Is that the same across the country? Probably not. I mean, there were a few hobby stores and things like this. There was a store in Bristol where you could go upstairs and everything upstairs was perfect 50-50 of Hornby trains, so it was a hobby store, or Scalextric cars, which still blew my mind as a kid because Scalextric was a big deal. My brother got one one Christmas and we absolutely loved it. And it was for kids, but also they would make like high-end Scalextric cars that basically should never leave the packet for collectors. So we had fun times in there, but it wasn't a toy shop. I mean, toy shops now, Toys R Us is coming back, and then there's Smith's. I'm pretty sure that's it. By all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but there weren't really, to be fair, that many toy stores back then. I do remember when, is it Hamleys or Hamleys? I think it's Hamleys opened in London. That was a complete toy store. I don't even know if that's still going. But there may have been a few independent little pokey ones here and there, but there were no actual chain toy stores in this country. Back then, if you wanted to go and purchase toys, it was either an aisle in a supermarket, which is still pretty much true nowadays, or basically a hobby store, or, and the purpose I want to talk about in this video, or the point I should say, department stores. Department stores back in the day at Christmas were the tits. They were fantastic because that was truly as close as you would get to a complete toy store, at least in my neck of the woods back in the day, because it's a department. So the name is, the clue was in the title, department stores. So obviously entertainment, clothes, men's clothes, women's clothes, toy department, and you would usually have at least no less than half a floor. Now when it came to Christmas, it's not that we didn't believe in Santa, and it's not that I'm suggesting Santa does not exist, but when you have a lead lattice on top of your chimney, there's no way even Santa's transmorphic abilities is getting into your house. So we used to literally write a list and give them to my mum, and obviously there were 3 of us. Christmas must have been very expensive for my mum. Maybe that's why she handled it and not so much Santa. But we would write a list, and the big toys when we were kids were, well, we liked Action Man, and then obviously that became Action Force, but the big ones, like most people of my age in this country, would have been Star Wars. Star Wars an absolute biggie, and the memories of department stores, which I'm going to talk about back then, and Transformers, and computers. Even though we had a ZX Spectrum, you were exposed to other computers in department stores. Now obviously we would give a list. I didn't know, my mum since told me then as an adult how she got them. She got my Soundwave, from British Home Stores, and then I think it was a year later she managed to get 2 Optimus Primes, one for me and one for my twin brother Ian, again from British Home Stores, and that was when he was the #1 toy. And I've said this before, can you imagine how gutted you would be if you were the person in line behind my mum when she turned around and walked off with 2 Optimus Primes, and then he went, "An Optimus Prime please," and they went, "Sorry, sold out," because I'm sure that probably happened to a lot of people. But even though we would go to department stores at Christmas, because my mum would do this every year in early December, and it was always early December, I guess to avoid the true crowds and stuff like that, and make things like parking easy and stuff like that. she would take us to the 3 big department stores in Bristol's. That's a rude word if you know what I'm talking about. In Bristol, and they would be John Lewis. I mean, there are other places like John Menzies and stuff like that, but we didn't have that in Bristol. We had John Lewis, and it was huge. Are they still going? I can't remember. I honestly don't know. Debenhams, which was huge, they're not going anymore. That was a sad day that went. I can tell you, because again, because of what I want to talk about in this video, I have such strong Christmas memories and nostalgia attached to that store. And British Home Stores, which I'm sure over the years, a great many of my Christmas presents and my brother's would have been purchased from. Now, we wouldn't go there to buy gifts, or we didn't go there, because like I said, we would have been like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pretty sure we probably didn't go above then. Maybe older than that when we went to Toys R Us. Spoilers! Going to talk about Toys R Us at the end of this video, but I think you knew that was coming. Because that was just like mind-blowing. That's as close as I ever got to going to the North Pole and Santa's, factory as a kid. Even if I was slightly a little bit older. I don't know. Memories are fuzzy on that. Jumping ahead of myself. We'll get to that later on. But she knew that even if she wasn't going to buy us stuff, because obviously you would write these lists, but you would be exposed to a massive amount of toy adverts, on TV, especially coming up to Christmas. And even if it was stuff that you didn't really want, but you would like to be exposed to it. I mean, you've gone to supermarkets, you've seen a small selection of Star Wars figures, maybe a little bit of Action Force, maybe a little bit of He-Man. I got a bunch of He-Man stuff for Christmas a couple of years as well. I had the one where you put caps in his back and he punts. I had the Skeletor with the dragon that sprayed water. I had the slime pit. I still got that boxed. Friggin' awesome that was. I had a little bit of Action Force. I had a chunk of Playmobil like earlier on. But you'd be exposed to all this on Christmas. And she knew that basically for her, it was a cheap day out. It was a free day out. Cheap being maybe buy us dinner, maybe buy us lunch, which you could usually do in the cafeteria above the department section of British Home Stores, which is obviously one as big as the other 2 department stores. But it was still fantastic at Christmas. Still have great memories of that at Christmas. But she knew that even if she didn't have to spend anything on us, other than, petrol, parking, maybe, chips, and a can of drink and stuff like that, which you wouldn't have to worry about us misbehaving. We would just be walking around these places with our jaw dragging along the floor. So just walking into these places, because obviously we'd only experienced stuff in supermarkets and stuff like that, and we knew what we wanted from TV and things like that. But walking in, especially John Lewis, going up, I can just remember going up the escalators with tinsel and Christmas decorations and trees everywhere, and the whole place being completely decked out, to be like the complete Christmas experience. Because, obviously, as a kid, you loved it. As an adult, you know that it was like, this stuff sells. Christmas sells. Especially get kids in the mood. So, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. To be fair, we were never like that. But yeah, always going up the escalators. Debenhams was great for escalators as well. But John Lewis was fantastic, because you were walking to this floor and they would have different sections for different toys, and it would be everywhere. And I can remember Playmobil. I remember the Playmobil spaceships, and they were behind glass, but they set up dioramas, and it would be like the box art and stuff like that. And yeah, there were fingerprints all over the glass and stuff like that, and you would just drool over it, absolutely drool over it. And then the diorama would be there, like the Playmobil shuttle, which I had, and the Playmobil little interceptor, a couple of spacemen and stuff like that. And then the boxes of the product within the glass displayed like on a moon. So because that would really excite a kid, really get a kid going, and I guess the idea being would like, Mom, that's me yanking my mum's hand, I want that. And there'd be a box, a table usually, with boxes and boxes and boxes of the products on it, and they did it for Star Wars. And I can still to this day remember seeing the AT-AT, because you remember there were 2 types of Star Wars box, weren't there? There was the Star Wars box with a plain background and a kid sat next to it with a kind of incredibly 70s, early 80s basin pudding bowl haircut, like that, looking at the ship. Didn't like them even as a kid. But then you would have their, diorama scene recreation from the movie, and the AT-AT one was amazing. And it was like Luke, because the pilot Luke came with a hook, didn't he? Hanging from the bottom of the AT-AT, and then there was a bunch of troopers and stuff like that. They had an AT-AT in a big glass case with some sort of fake snow everywhere underneath it, and it was huge, and a bunch of figures. And then you would see that, and you'd see the AT-ATs, and it would just blow your mind, because it was such a big impact. If you've seen it set up and stuff like that, you never had that when you played with it. Your imagination filled in that bit, but seeing it like that just was like they scooped the inside out of your toy playing head and stuck it in a glass case. It was fantastic, and you walk around and they'd have similar stuff. I mean, this is when me and my brothers were completely and utterly into Star Wars, and it was at its height. So we're talking like 1980 to 82, 83, you know, so Empire to Jedi here, but you see a Millennium Falcon set up and stuff like that, and even as a kid, seeing a massive table full of boxes and boxes and boxes of Millennium Falcons was just absolutely mind-blowing and really, really exciting. Then they'd have a section for Action Force or G.I. Joe if you're North American, because we couldn't call it G.I. Joe in this country because apparently English kids wouldn't understand what, you know, general infantry was. Whereas Action Force sounds nothing like the army. But they did the same sort of thing. Now, this can't have just been my John Lewis, so I'd love to know if this happened in yours as well. But yeah, they did the same thing. They had a whole bunch of Cobra figures and stuff like that. That would be a little bit later on, because the original Action Force we saw was the Action Man Action Force. And I can remember in John Lewis, going way back before then, just when Action Force came out, and Action Man was kind of being slowly taken out to pasture and shot, there was a whole bunch of them coming up to Christmas, and they were super, super cheap and reduced. And it was when you bought an Action Man and it came in a box like that. No bubble or blister pack or anything like that, just a box. And I got the Spaceman, and my brother got the Space Alien. They were super cheap. And for once, when we were out, you know, experiencing the, you know, department stores, like basically Christmas grottos, because that's what they were set up to be. She said you could have this, you know, like a special treat, and it was fantastic. And so many of my great memories of toys that I maybe had a few of, but didn't collect to the extent that I did Transformers and Star Wars, came from going into these places where they would have, specifically John Lewis, a little setup, you know, like an action scene and stuff like that, and then a bunch of the stuff. And it sold me as a kid. It really, really, really did, even though my mum never bought things here from, you know, at the time. Well, obviously she wouldn't, apart from, you know, the treat of an Action Man figure for me and my twin brother, but otherwise because you knew what you were getting. And but I just remember it was these days you were genuinely excited when you knew that you were coming up to this day, whether it was early, you know, December, so it was on a weekend or stuff like that, or maybe it was like after we broke up for school, because I do remember a couple of times when it was like, you know, hustle bustle everywhere, loads of people, which as a kid just adds to the excitement. But you would really, really look forward to this. This was a genuine, exciting day out, even though you knew you were going to get no toys. You didn't care. Christmas was coming up. You were going to get toys for Christmas. But honestly, going out and experiencing these things in the high street, particularly, as I said, seeing Playmobil, Action Man, Action Force, Mask, there's the best bit, the bit I truly, truly remember about John Lewis. And also, Debenhams was pretty much set up exactly the same as this, but Debenhams was pretty sure where I remember seeing all the computers that we'll get to in a moment. You know, and touch upon. But yeah, it was in your local supermarket, you'd have a very small selection of you'd have a small selection of computer games, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. Sorry, spoilers. But and a small selection of Star Wars figures, small selection of Action Force. But as I said, Star Wars was our bread and butter. When you went to places like John Lewis and you had a whole department, or at least half a floor, their figure section was literally a wall of pegs. And obviously, you know how it works. Peg, one type of figure, Darth Vader. Although he was really, really hard to get for a bunch of years, wasn't he? But my mum managed to get me and my twin brother one. And I can remember Christmas morning when she rolled him up like that. Adult me would have cried seeing that on Christmas Day. Put an elastic band around it and stuffed it in the stocking that we hung on the side of our beds. Mad props to my parents' ninja skills or stealth skills when we were kids, because obviously you can't have slept that heavily from like 5 to 10. That they could get in your room with a big massive plastic sack full of toys and stuff like that, and rattly things in, you know, plastic boxes that would shake and make noise and stuff like that, and then stick stuff in a stocking next to your head. And you didn't wake up. Mad props there, stealth skills to the extreme. I'm pretty sure you've all experienced stuff like that, you know, when you were a really young kid, and you thought, no, it obviously was Father Christmas. Again, as I mentioned, Santa couldn't get down the chimney, so that's why my parents had to pick up, you know, the slack for him on this one. To be fair, it wasn't his fault with the lead lattice on the chimney. But Anyway, yeah, Star Wars figures, and it was just a different one every peg. And obviously, being very, very young and very, very small probably made the wall seem a lot bigger than it was, but it was certainly a lot bigger than a supermarket. And yeah, just like looking up like that, and it was a wall of Star Wars figures, more Star Wars figures than I'd ever seen in my life. Now, as a kid, that was worth the price of admission alone. A wall of Star Wars figures just to look at Christmas, regardless of the fact that you were walking out of that store with absolutely nothing. It wasn't about that. It was just literally, I mean, I can't be the only one that generally looking at toys when you went to places that had far more toys than you'd ever been exposed to in your life was a genuinely exciting and cool event. And obviously, seeing Transformers, I can remember there was an entire aisle in one of these. This would have been British Home Stores. They had an entire aisle of, so they weren't as big as the other two, entire aisle, I'll get there in the end, of Transformers, and just seeing all these Transformers, and ones that you never knew you were even going to get. Like, I can remember seeing Megatron, we got Optimus Prime, I can remember seeing, you know, all the jets, Skywarp, Thundercracker, Dirge, Starscream, almost forgot about that. Remember that? Can remember seeing, you know, like Hound, Ratchet, Ironhide, the mini bots and stuff like that. But I do remember one year, and this is when I decided that I wanted to get it. I remember when I saw Rodimus Prime, because I fucking shouldn't swear on a Christmas video, but I can't help it. Fucking fell in love with Rodimus Prime in Transformers the movie. Absolutely loved Rodimus Prime. He was there. All the other kids were crying, upset about Optimus Prime. Honestly, didn't care. Rodimus Prime was the shit. And I remember telling my mum, she was like, listen, we have to go now. We have to go now. What's that? 1986. I would have been 10, 11. Yeah, I was just drooling over it. I mean, I'd imagine the people in the store were probably looking at this kid, you know, and just get your greasy, dirty little hands off that. Someone else might want to buy it, but you're just stood there drooling at it. Back off, man. It's Optimus. It's Rodimus Prime. But yeah, I can just remember, like, I was obsessed with it, absolutely obsessed with it. I mean, the other movie ones and stuff like that were there, but I didn't care. And I got that for Christmas that year. And so that was kind of a little bit different than saying that, you know, most of our toys have been bought around about this time. But yeah, that was definitely because I saw that in British Home Stores. And British Home Stores had more Transformers, even more Transformers in the other two places. Debenhams was great because they would like have fake snow and shit in the toy department. I don't mean like you know, like moving around and you walk through it and stuff like that, but they'd have like bits to the side where you couldn't walk, and they'd have like, you know, snow effect and stuff like that, like solid lumps and stuff like that, like grassy snow and stuff like that. But also you could play with their remote control cars. That's what I remember the most about Debenhams. You could play with their remote control cars and stuff like that, and that was something else as a kid. I mean, that was brilliant because a lot of the time you could never get these things because they'd be so expensive, but you knew like on your day out you would get to experience it. But the one thing I remember about Debenhams is that's where we went to see Father Christmas in a grotto. So we'd have been quite young then, and yeah, and there was a big lineup, and you went and sat on you know, Father Christmas's knee. Hey, you may not have come down my chimney, but he had no problem with me sitting on his knee. Can you even do that now? Is the world that cold in a shallow place that you can't do stuff like that anymore? And yeah, and you pay, I can't remember what you pay because I was a kid and I wasn't paying, I wasn't footing the bill. And you get, literally just, you know, you say a couple of words, what do you want for Christmas? And you tell him what you want for Christmas, then he give you something from a sack that was clearly not going to be something you want for Christmas. Even as a kid, you knew this. And we got these guns where you used to put a pile of discs in the top like that and shoot them. And we went this time with my gran, so when we got back to my gran's house, she turned the fire guard inside out and just went, she was a smart lady, shoot them at that, shoot them at that. But that was brilliant because, yeah, that was, again, when you're really young, seeing Father Christmas or Santa Claus, jolly old Saint Nick, even if it's in a department store, you know, you can't tell it's a fake beard and stuff like that. You, like, genuinely a really exciting moment. But yeah, the one I think, like I said, remember about Debenhams, again, escalators to get to the toy department, was the remote control cars, and they had a whole bunch of computers set up. So even though we had a Spectrum, they had a Commodore, an Amstrad Spectrum, there's some Ataris and stuff like that set up, 2600s. When I say Ataris, I mean computers. And so even though you never wanted anything other than what you had, I'm talking pre-consoles here, well, 2600 is, but you know what I mean. It was still amazingly cool to see these other computers. Even if you couldn't play them, there was just stuff running on them in the background. Again, usually in some cases behind a glass case. That was still absolutely fantastic. Again, that was just, because kids love computers. But the big, and we only went once, and it was at Christmas. And it would have been between 85 and 89, and it may not have been in Bristol. It may have been even as far as Birmingham, which isn't actually that far from Bristol. It's an hour on the motorway. And be honest, you can't tell, because as a kid you could never really work out how long a journey was when you were sat in a car anyway, could you? But Toys R Us, the adverts came on. Do you remember there's a wonderful building where all people go? I can't remember the song. You know the song. I can't put it in or I'll get slapped for copyright. It's a cartoon one, and apparently Geoffrey the giraffe is making kids work at Christmas Eve. No labour laws back then, eh? But yeah, and it made the news, which is this massive, toy store chain is coming to the United Kingdom. It's been knocking around in America since, well, 50s, 60s, and it's finally coming to Britain. And by maybe a couple opened in 85, but the adverts are on TV. They talked about it on the news. It made programs like Blue Peter, which is, look, here you go, kids. You've always dreamed of a store the size of a supermarket that sold nothing but toys. It's finally coming here. That was like a game changer. As a kid, you couldn't believe that. You literally soiled your pants when you found out about that store, and you always wanted to go. Always wanted to go. There was always a kid at school who said he'd been when clearly he hadn't. But even though they would exaggerate and say, like, it was as big as a football pitch, I do remember when we finally went, and again, it was no later than 89, and the thing is, I didn't see Star Wars figures, but I saw Transformers, so it was definitely no later than 89, but was possibly, well, that would have been right, because in 85, they were on their way out. I don't think we got Power of the Force in this country, did we? But there was a massive drive. I mean, we had two in Bristol for years and years and years, and they were around from very early days as well. I don't know if they were 85. Maybe they were. Again, rose-tinted nostalgic goggles. Remember this. Dates aren't necessarily cemented in a child's head quite so much. But walking into a Toys R Us, big car journey, you're going to Toys R Us, this place that everyone talked about on TV, a couple of kids had talked about at school, you knew there was nothing but toys, and you finally went there. The car journey was unbearable. Again, you have no sort of indication of how long car journeys were when you're a kid, like you do when you're an adult. Hence the fact that people always say, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? But those slidey doors opened, and you could literally just, your entire peripheral vision was full up of toys, of bikes, of things like this, and that smell of everything, of plastic, of rubber from the bikes, and things like that. But literally just doing a look like that, and there were toys everywhere in their consoles. They had computers, every single toy brand, because even the department store, Debenhams and stuff like that, wouldn't have every toy, but going somewhere and they had everything. And this is what I meant when I said at the start of the video, this was as close as you could get to going to Santa's factory in the North Pole, because as a kid it literally was toys everywhere, every kind of toy there. Whether you're a girl, whether you're a boy, you were covered. I mean, it was mind-blowing. I'm not doing it justice. I mean, if I could scoop my head out and just slob it, throw it into this video, the nostalgia and the memories and the genuine excitement of going to Toys R Us for the first time, which is why when it went bankrupt a few years ago, I was genuinely upset. And the fact that when our mum took us there, that was a genuine, fantastic treat and day out. But yeah, that first time walking into Toys R Us, never, ever seen anything like it. Never went again, and it was a Christmas. Didn't really need to be fair. But yeah, I cannot put into words how incredible an experience. But that would have been because of the fact that we never had anything like that growing up in the late 70s, very early 80s in England. An entire store. I mean, I thought the department stores having a floor were impressive, but an entire store with nothing but toys. Bikes, products, activities. Trampolines, tents, things for kids was just. Anyway, I've waffled on far too long and I've gone all over the shop, but it's one of my videos, so I'm pretty sure you're used to that and were expecting it. I'd love to know what your memories are as a kid, particularly if you are of my vintage and you went to these places, and remember the department store names that I've talked about. And did you go to Toys R Us at Christmas? Did you do this as a day out, as a treat, not necessarily getting presents bought for you, but going downtown with your parents to experience the fact that these stores would set themselves up to be Christmassy, obviously to sell stuff, but as a kid you weren't cynical and you didn't see that. You liked the fact that you went there and it was set up to be Christmassy. It was just an incredible experience walking around toy stores as a kid at Christmas. I'd love to know if you did, what your memories are and the ones you went to. And as always, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic Christmas. Eat as much as you want, drink as much as you want. I hope you get a whole bunch of really cool shit, and I hope you have a fantastic new year. Thank you for watching me through 2022 as well. I very much appreciate my wonderful, wonderful audience. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you later.